Why is my mom's photo here? The small, trembling voice echoed across the marble hall, freezing the billionaire where he stood. His glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. The girl's eyes, deep brown, fierce and fearless, locked onto the gold-framed photo hanging beside the staircase. A photo of a young black woman, smiling beside him. For a second, he couldn't breathe. His throat tightened, palms sweating. The girl couldn't be more than 10. Worn sneakers, messy braids, a tray of homemade sweets still trembling in her hands. She shouldn't have been inside this mansion, worth more than her entire neighborhood. Yet here she was, staring at his wall like she had uncovered a crime scene. If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now, because stories like this are still happening, and the world needs to hear them. The man finally managed to whisper, Where'd you get that picture?" "That's my mom," the girl replied coldly. "Grace Thompson. But you already knew that, didn't you?" He froze again. The name hit him like thunder. Grace, the woman he had buried in his heart for 11 long years. The woman his family told him died in an accident. But the eyes staring back at him, the same eyes now standing in front of him, told a different story. "You're mistaken," he stammered. "Grace died years ago." "Then why," she said, stepping closer, "is her photo hanging in your house?" The silence was suffocating. Every tick of the clock echoed like a hammer. The little girl tilted her head slightly, studying his every movement, calm, unshaken, as if she already knew the truth but wanted him to say it out loud. "She's dying," the girl whispered. "Cancer. We don't have money for treatment. But when I saw your name in an old photo on her nightstand, I started asking questions." The man's knees weakened. The resemblance was undeniable. The same face, the same voice, the same stubborn courage that once made him fall in love. He took a step back, realizing what this moment truly was. Not a coincidence, not a child mistake, but the beginning of a reckoning he'd never seen coming. Hours earlier, the morning had smelled like rain and burnt sugar. 10-year-old Imani had been standing by a broken streetlight, balancing a tray of homemade sweets her mother taught her to make. Every coin she earned went straight into a small jar labeled Mom's Medicine. Her mother, Grace, used to be radiant, strong voice, easy laugh. But now, she was pale and coughing up blood in a house that leaked when it rained. The doctor said chemotherapy might help, but even their rent was overdue. Still, Grace never complained. She only whispered, "Keep believing, baby. Truth always finds its way home." Imani had memorized those words, repeating them like a prayer every time someone ignored her on the street. That morning, as cars sped by without stopping, one glossy black limousine slowed down. The tinted windows slid open, and a man in a perfect suit looked down at her. His wristwatch probably cost more than her entire street. "How much for the whole tray?" he asked, voice calm but heavy with importance. Imani blinked, startled. $15, sir." He smiled faintly, reached into his pocket, and handed her a 50. "Keep the change." When he drove to the iron gates of a hilltop mansion, Imani's eyes followed the car like she was chasing a ghost. Her heart thudded, not from excitement, but recognition. She had seen that man's face before. On a faded photo her mother kept hidden in a cracked drawer. That night, while Grace slept under a flickering bulb, Imani held the old photo closer. The man in the picture had his arm around her mother, younger, happier, wearing the same smile she'd almost forgotten. And behind them stood the same gates she had just seen that day. The next morning, she packed her sweets again, heart pounding. She walked straight to that mansion, past the same iron gates, and when the guard didn't stop her, she knew fate had opened a door. Now, standing before the billionaire, every second of hunger, fear, and pain in her short life made sense. She hadn't come here to sell sweets anymore. She had come to uncover why her dying mother's smile hung proudly in a stranger's home. The man's throat tightened. "Grace, she's still alive?" Imani's voice didn't tremble. "Barely. And every night, she says one name before she sleeps. Yours." He turned away, staring at the marble floor that now felt like ice. That's impossible. My mother arranged the funeral. There was an accident. I saw the report. She stepped closer, her small hands clenching into fists. Then where's the proof? Where are the papers? The police file? The death certificate? His silence answered everything. For the first time, he realized he had never seen any of it himself. His mother had said Grace died overseas, that she handled the paperwork. He had believed her, because rich people don't question other rich people's lies. Imani took a slow breath. Your mother took everything from mine. Her home, her dignity, her chance at a life. And you let her. The words sliced deep. He wanted to argue, but guilt hit harder than pride. He remembered how his mother, Victoria Carter, always called Grace that girl. Like her name was poison, he whispered. You think my mother? I don't think, Imani interrupted. I know. Her cracked phone glowed dimly in her hand. Grace said someone threatened her to disappear or her baby would be taken. That's me. And she ran before they could find her. His pulse raced. Who told her that? Imani's lips curved into a bitter smile. She doesn't remember names anymore. Just fear. But every time she sees the Carter logo, she shakes. He tried to steady himself, voice breaking. I didn't know. I swear, you didn't want to know, she snapped. You were too busy believing your rich world was fair. Her eyes filled with tears, but her tone stayed sharp. While you had champagne on ice, my mom boiled rainwater for tea. While you wore silk suits, I sold candy on sidewalks to buy painkillers for her. You live in her grave, a mansion built on her silence. The billionaire felt his stomach twist. Years of comfort suddenly felt like chains. Every portrait, every award on his wall, all built on one lie. He finally whispered, Then what do you want from me? Imani looked up, calm and unblinking. Justice, she said. Not money, not pity, just truth, loud enough that even rich people can't hide from it. If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe. The next morning, the billionaire Carter Logan sat at his desk, surrounded by a lifetime of lies. Contracts, letters, charity awards that suddenly meant nothing. Imani sat across from him, her legs dangling off the chair, a notebook open in front of her. You kept every paper your mother handled? She asked. He nodded slowly. She was meticulous. Good, Imani said, flipping through a stack of folders with unsettling confidence. Then the proof is here. Somewhere. Carter watched her move, this little girl who refused to flinch before power. Her focus, her calm, she reminded him of Grace. The same quiet fire. Hours passed. Dust floated in beams of sunlight as the girl read old letters aloud, business memos, law firm receipts, and one document that froze Carter mid-breath. Montgomery Associates, she read. Your mother's law firm. Confidential agreement, dated 11 years ago, with a medical center. Why would a law firm pay a hospital? Carter snatched the paper, scanning the signature. His heart sank. My mother's handwriting. Imani crossed her arms. So she didn't just lie. She paid people to erase records. He sank into his chair, face pale. She must have wanted to protect me. She thought Grace stopped protecting her. Imani interrupted, her voice trembling with strength. Your mother destroyed mine. Don't call that protection. The words shattered the air. Carter looked at the girl again. This wasn't anger. It was control. She wasn't begging for truth. She was commanding it. What are you planning? He finally asked. Imani's lips curved into a small, dangerous smile. We're going to find who helped her. Lawyers, doctors, whoever took that money. And then we make them talk. Carter hesitated. That could expose powerful people. That's the point, she said. If your world hides behind money, then we'll use truth as our weapon. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a billionaire. He felt like a father, one who had something to fix before it was too late. Carter nodded slowly. Then we start today. Imani closed the notebook. Good, because I've already made the first call. That night, the glow from Carter's desk lamp lit a battlefield of documents, hospital records, legal contracts, and hidden payments that spelled out a decade of betrayal. Imani sat cross-legged on the floor, her cracked phone charging beside her as she scrolled through public records like a trained investigator. "I found something," she said, lifting her head. Montgomery Associates handled 15 sealed cases in the past 10 years. Every one involved a poor black family disappearing after a settlement. Carter rubbed his temples. "My mother's name is on half of these. She funded the settlements." "She didn't fund them," Imani replied. "She bought silence." Her tone made him look up. There was no fear in her voice, only precision. She had turned pain into focus, a weapon sharper than anger. He exhaled heavily. If this is true, the firm's still doing it. That means they're untouchable. "Not if we make them visible," Imani said, handing him a card. "I reached out to someone who exposes people like this. Samantha Torres, investigative journalist. She's waiting at a cafe downtown." Carter stared at the card, surprised. "You talked to a journalist?" "Last night. Told her just enough to get her curious. She's been tracking this law firm for years." By noon, they were sitting across from Samantha, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with a recorder on the table. "You're telling me Victoria Carter faked a woman's death to hide her son's relationship?" she asked. Imani met her gaze. "And she wasn't the only one. There are others like my mom, women silenced, children erased." Samantha clicked the recorder. "If you can prove even half of this, I can get the FBI involved. But once we start, there's no turning back." Carter's jaw tightened. "Then we start now." Samantha leaned forward. "The firm is hosting an emergency meeting tomorrow night. All partners present. I can plant 2 federal observers. Bring your evidence, but be ready. They'll know you're coming." Back home, Imani drew circles and arrows on a city map, marking routes and times. Carter watched, equal parts terrified and proud. "Imani," he said quietly. "If this goes wrong, it won't," she interrupted. "They've hidden behind power for too long. It's time someone smaller reminded them what truth looks like." Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, the kind that warns of storms before justice finally breaks through. The following night, the city glimmered under rain. At precisely 7:45 p.m., the glass doors of Montgomery Associates opened, and silence fell across the marble lobby. The partners, 6 of them, all in tailored suits, entered the boardroom expecting a private meeting. But someone was already there. Imani sat at the head of the table, a laptop glowing before her. Her face calm but unreadable. Carter stood behind her, jaw set, while Samantha Torres adjusted a small mic pinned to her blazer. "Good evening, gentlemen," Imani said softly. "I hope you don't mind the change of agenda." Dr. Montgomery, the firm's senior partner, blinked in disbelief. "How did you get in here? This is private property." "Not anymore," Samantha said, showing her badge. "This meeting is being monitored by federal agents. Everything you say is on record." The lawyers exchanged glances. "This is outrageous," one shouted. Imani pressed a key. Audio recordings filled the room, Montgomery's voice cold and calculated. "If she finds out what we did to Carter's mother, we're finished. Handle it quietly." Their faces drained of color. Interesting choice of words. Carter said evenly, "Because the girl you thought you silenced is sitting right here." One of the partners slammed the table. "You can't use those recordings. They're illegal." Imani turned the laptop to him. "Actually, they're not. Section 2511 of the Federal Code. Recordings made with suspicion of criminal activity are admissible, especially when backed by a court order." She lifted a stamped document signed 3 days earlier. "Samantha's doing." "Dr. Montgomery's hands trembled. "You don't understand the kind of people involved in this." "People like you?" Imani asked, her tone steady. "Who buy silence and call it business?" Behind her, 2 federal agents stepped forward. "Gentlemen, you're under investigation for conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice." Carter watched as the men who had buried his truth were handcuffed one by one. His heart pounded, not with rage, but relief. For the first time, the weight of guilt began to lift. Imani stood, closing her laptop with a quiet click. You destroyed family for money, but tonight, the truth destroyed you. Montgomery tried one last plea. Do you have any idea what you started? Imani met his eyes, calm as ever. A revolution built on truth. As the agents led the men away, Samantha whispered, You just broke a wall most people are too afraid to touch. Imani looked up. Walls fall when you stop fearing their size. Morning light poured gently through the tall windows of the mansion. The same place that once felt cold and cursed now smelled of warmth and coffee. Grace sat in a soft chair near the window, her hair wrapped in a colorful scarf, her cheeks full again. The doctor said the treatment was working. Imani sat across from her mother, sorting through a stack of letters. Hundreds of them. Messages from families who had watched the live broadcast. People thanking her for having the courage to speak up. Another one from Chicago, she said softly. A woman who lost her son to a false arrest. She says your story gave her hope. Grace smiled faintly, tears glimmering in her eyes. You gave her hope, baby. You showed the world that truth can come from the smallest voice. Carter entered the room quietly, no longer the billionaire who hid behind glass walls, but a man who finally understood what family meant. The firm's partners pleaded guilty, he said, sitting beside them. The government's setting up a restitution fund. They'll help the families who lost everything. Imani nodded, still reading. Good. But it's not just about punishment. It's about change. Carter smiled. You sound just like your mother. Grace reached for his hand, and for the first time in years, there was no anger, only peace. We can't change the past, she said softly, but we can stop others from repeating it. Imani looked up from the letters, her eyes bright. You know what I learned, Mom? Grace tilted her head. What's that? That injustice is like cancer, Imani said quietly. If you don't treat it completely, it comes back stronger. Carter took a deep breath. Then let's keep fighting it together. The three of them sat in silence, the sound of birds filling the space that once echoed with secrets. Outside, the morning sun spilled across the garden, where Imani's tray of sweets rested on the table. Not for sale this time, but shared among neighbors who had come to thank her. Justice had begun with one question. And now, the world was finally listening. If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it.